Today, we have a moral question to pose to all of you dear players. The moral question that will define your character. Now, there is no right or wrong answer to this. Unlike what Blizzard thinks, apparently, from the writing of their characters, being morally evil can still be quite fun. The moral question for today is, sometimes players go into a heroic pug. Maybe nowadays, I guess, even some mythic pugs are being done in the raid. And then they go into the raid. Finally, you that have also joined that pug see that Juster Diamond drop from Gallywix. Of course, every single one of the players in the raid, their mothers, their distant relatives, and even some of the elementary school teachers of the players in the raid will need on the Juster Diamond from Gallywix. And then, first thing you know, you don't even have time to frantically type /loot to check if you actually are still winning in the loot roll of Juster Diamond before you see, of course, the one guy who rolls 100 on the roll right after you rolled 99, of course, just to make it hurt even more. You haven't even realized that immediately in Raider chat you will start to see the auction being launched by that player who is now selling that Juster Diamond. In a mixed fit of rage and confusion, you inspect that player only to realize he already has a Juster Diamond. It actually even procced with avoidance and leech and multi-strike and armor penetration. So he actually had no need for that Juster Diamond, but still needed on it and is now trying to sell it. And that's why we have this moral debate. Pugs are generally made with players being complete strangers. You don't owe anything to these players. In some cases, if by miracle, for example, that Gallywix pug was a one-shot, you practically spent at most 10 minutes of your time with those players. And you just won the roll on an item. So it could be within your rights to very simply do whatever you want with the item you just won, including selling it. On the other hand, there is the social custom to believe that in an MMORPG, part of the RPG element, part also of the MMO element is to join with other players, kill bosses, and then roll on loot. And if you win the loot, you get to keep it because, it's stuff you need. So having players specifically go out of their way to try to kill bosses they don't need, for loot they don't need, just so they can try to sell it, goes against the spirit, the nature of the game. So now you have one side claiming it's perfectly ethical for players to join groups just so they can win loot for prized items, for example, trinkets. Nowadays, this season, this raid trinkets are totally overpowered compared to Mythic Plus trinkets, right? Especially the last 3 bosses worth of trinkets. One Armed Bandit has the House of Cards, practically the best trinket in this season. Magzi has Moxie Jug, basically the second best trinket this season, and then Gallywix of course has Eye of Kazan, which is the best trinket, sure, but in Mythic Raid only, and then of course you also have Juster Diamond from Gallywix. While the other side is claiming it's completely anti-ethical to join a raid knowing you don't need anything, knowing you're just there to try to win the loot so you can start an auction and make some gold from the items you are winning. Now, there are some valid points on both sides. One point on the side of the scammers, that's the side of the swindlers, the side of the scalpers standing in front of a stadium trying to resell their tickets at 15 times the price, and that is the fact that, part of the reason why you managed to go through that pug and you were surprised as to why you one-shot Gallywix is because you had 7 players with 15 kills on Gallywix who were vastly overgearing the encounter. A bunch of them were already 4, 5 or even 6 out of 8 mythic progression. They were actually quite good players and just went in there trying to win those items to sell. Meaning, if these players didn't exist anymore, if we somehow made it so it was no longer possible to do this, those players would have never joined Gallywix, which means that now the quality of the players you're trying to pug these bosses with would go down dramatically, because you would basically remove a whole lot of these players because they would no longer need those items. So you could get a better experience in the term of the loot chance you have without actually improving your chance of getting the loot, because the players that are going to be replacing those better players are very likely still going to need on those items anyways. So you're practically replacing good players carrying you through a boss for worse players that won't carry you and likely will still need the item. The only difference is how you will feel, because if you just lost the Juster Diamond to 6 other players 6 different times, and all of those players were worse players than you actually out-DPS'd them, but they still won the item, you would have just felt somewhat unlucky, maybe somewhat bitter because they didn't deserve to get the item, but that would have been it. Meanwhile, now you just lost Juster Diamond 6 times in 6 different raids to 6 different players who did not need the item and tried to sell it, which is what makes you mad. Even though the actual result, if you change those players for players who needed that Juster for themselves, it would have been the same. That's the argument in defense of these resellers. The fact that, after all, I am still here to do what I signed up with, which is perform well, do well in the encounter and help defeating the boss. Whatever I end up doing with the items that drop from the boss if I win the role is none of your business. And plus, as I mentioned, if you think about it, I likely made it easier and better to defeat the boss, because I am a 3.2k rated Mythic Plus player who is 6 out of 8 Mythic and was 669 item level, and I was top damage. So if you replaced me with some 662, 2400 IO and not even ahead of the curve caliber player who would have still needed on that trinket, he would have likely done less damage, possibly wiped you more, and you still wouldn't have gotten any better chances of getting that item for yourself. You just would have felt better because you lost the role to a player who used the trinket rather than losing it to a player who tries to resell it, but the end result would have been the same. The other argument, the other side of the spectrum could be, what about personal role? What about the much despised and much criticized personal loot? Right? What if we fix this with personal loot? Because now you no longer have the risk of ninjas, scalpers and resellers if you simply make it roll personally. You can still allow players who win personal loot to resell the item, but at the very least now you won't feel bad because that item was won basically by themselves. It was just a chance they personally had to win the item on personal loot. So since we have established the major issue of this system is your feelings, the fact that you feel bad seeing players on a roll sheet beat you even though they don't need the item and then try to resell it, personal loot would be hiding this, because basically personal loot is the exact same as normal loot except all the rolls are hidden. All the rolls of personal loot are done by the game as soon as the boss dies, and the game decides who gets the loot personally. So you won't get to see the actual rolls, and you simply will see the players looting the items. And then perhaps it won't feel nearly as bad for you to see those players who didn't need those items win on personal loot and then try to resell those items. That's the current argument players have been having about this, this trend players have. Some don't even do it specifically for this. For example, it's perfectly acceptable for many players, for example, to still jump into a heroic lockout because they need one thing. Let's just say even good high-level mythic raid players, trying to progress right now, for example, One-Armed Bandit or Magzi, it's perfectly logical for some of them to still need, let's just say, the Moxie Jug from Magzi. Their guild 6 weeks in has stopped doing heroic runs, so they have to go and pug Magzi to try to win the trinket, and as they go through the raid, they kill One-Armed Bandit and the House of Cards drops. Now, they don't necessarily need it for themselves, and they didn't join the raid just so they could try to roll on this item to try to resell it, but since it dropped, and since they put in the effort to help and kill this boss, they might as well try to need on it and then resell it if they win the loot. Ultimately, they are putting the same effort as everyone else. They are also likely, as mentioned, since they are there only because they needed one item, they are practically already forfeiting on any other item that drops. So all of the more under-geared characters have more chances of getting some loot in that run. So it would be sort of like a consolation prize to still be able to roll on the more valuable items to try to resell them. Ultimately, it still comes down to semantics, whether or not you think that two players putting in the same amount of effort and the same amount of skill and damage defeating a boss, whether or not they have the same right to do whatever they want with the item that drops, or if you should be morally lawful good and abide by the social standards which dictate that if you go into a raid, you need on items you want to use for yourself on your character only. That is the current divide we have for now. I don't have, of course, an answer to this. I don't have particular stake in this debate. I personally agree with both sides, so I guess I agree with the reselling part. As long as you are in the raid and you put in effort to kill the boss, then you are pretty much entitled to do whatever you want with the item you win. And I guess on a side note, this could be sort of as a warning to players whenever they make their PUG. Yes, you can be happy you invited all of these players, which might seem a little bit overqualified for the PUG you are making, a little bit too big for the pond you're trying to swim in. So don't be surprised once those players start needing on things they don't need because they were in there just to try to resell that stuff. So it kind of goes both ways. I will leave, of course, to you your own personal opinion on this. There's not much Blizzard can do at the moment to police any of this. As mentioned, there is still the risk, even if they did try to police this with, for example, personal loot, even more strict personal loot where you can't even trade it if you win it, the possibility of these players no longer even engaging in these runs, meaning that the average skill level, the quality of the applicants to your PUGs might drop dramatically, meaning PUGing would become even harder now because all of these players would no longer even bother joining these PUGs. So these are the options at the moment when it comes to the PUG life in the game. So with this community debate, shower thought on this Wednesday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting, as usual, of course, the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who's been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, well, okay, we broke the cycle. We mentioned yesterday it was raining for 3 days straight. Now we kind of stopped. It's still cloudy, the risk is still there, but we are on a pause for now.